Hi, and welcome to the Stephan Livera podcast, focused on Bitcoin and Austrian economics. Today, my guest is Wiz. I met Wiz while I was on my recent holiday in Japan, in Tokyo. Wiz is one of the well-known long-time Bitcoiners and also been around the scene and was around in the days of Mt. Gox as well. He's a great Bitcoiner, and I'm sure you guys will love this interview. Wiz, it was a pleasure to meet you in Japan, and I know you've got a great history in Bitcoin, and you're doing some cool stuff, and so it's a pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on your show. It's an honor to be here.
Fantastic. So look, I think some of the listeners who are a little newer, they might not know you and know a little bit about your history, your involvement with, Bitcoin and the Tokyo scene. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, I'm originally from Honolulu, Hawaii, and I moved to Tokyo when I was about 20 years old. So I've been in Tokyo for a good 13 years now, and I'm a total, high school dropout hacker kid who grew up on, FNet IRC networks with script kiddies, and that's how I learned how to kind of use a Unix shell and how to write some code here and there. And yeah, actually, I grew up working for like some ISP startups and some data center startups in Honolulu, and that's how I kind of learned what's going on. So yeah, let's see. So I've been in Tokyo for 13 years. I've seen a lot of drama, especially in the Bitcoin scene. It all started with Mt. Gox trading on there, and to the modern day now, where I'm literally running the Meetup group in Tokyo, and we got like a really solid following. So yeah, it's a lot to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. I know, you've got, although you're no longer involved, you're also part of the Wiz SEC group as well, self-titled. So maybe just tell a little bit about, just for the listeners who aren't as familiar, just a little bit around what Wiz SEC did or does.
Sure, yeah. So it's it was originally a group of three people: myself, my friend Kim Nilsson, and an attorney from New York named Daniel Kellman. We'd all been goxed after we lost everything we had on Mount Gox, and we just started working to investigate and figure out what happened. Um, of course, largely now it's just Kim and his blog and all his hard work over the years, researching, investigating Mt. Gox, analyzing their database, everything like that. I want to make it really clear. I'm not affiliated with WizSec anymore. I left years ago. It's all Kim now. All the hard work he's been doing, he deserves 100% full credit for that. And I'm just a freelancer now. I'm just Wiz now.
Yeah, cool. And look, I know you've done some really cool stuff recently as well. Like, obviously on Twitter, the followers might know you had a really great thread about being more self-sovereign, and so I think that's a big focus of yours. So maybe just tell us a little bit of your thoughts on that. Why should people try to be a little more self-sovereign?
Yeah, I guess I was really lucky to grow up in the ISP kind of data center scene where I got to really learn how the internet works firsthand, to the point where I was pretty much running, a lot of important internet connectivity in Hawaii when I was a teenager, and that got me to figure out, how to get IP address blocks, how to connect routers to, how to do cross connects, what's an internet exchange, and basically just how the internet works in general. And from that knowledge, I had just set up a small ISP just for myself in Honolulu when I was very young, and I still have it to this day. And it's actually a lot simpler than what you might think. To set up an ISP sounds like a big project, but it's really at the simplest. It could just be one router that's connected to at least two other networks or an internet exchange, and that's all you really need to qualify as an ISP, right? The thread you're referring to on Twitter is this very nice. It was a very popular thread on Twitter. I got a lot of hits on that, where I just kind of explained you could be an apartment building, and your router could connect to your neighbor's router, and you could route in between like that, and you keep scaling that up until you have buildings connected to buildings, and that's all the internet is, right? Is this one giant mesh network. And so after everyone kind of saw that thread, they were all sending me all these messages like, oh yeah, I want to start my own ISP. Actually, really famous Bitcoiner Blue Matt has just started his own ISP in his apartment in New York. He's all about the self-sovereignty. So I think he purchased a small IP block, and he's got his own ASN number, autonomous system number. So he's now connected to some mesh network in New York. And, obviously I'm very far physically from New York and over here in Tokyo, but we've been talking, trying to figure out how to physically interconnect our networks and actually do some peering together. But it all kind of comes down to self-sovereignty, right? And I think that's the reason everyone's genuinely interested, is that I think, Bitcoin philosophy is all about not trusting people and verifying uh, yourself. And this is essentially what happened in USA a while back. Everyone trusted their internet providers to give them an honest, unfiltered, raw internet connection, but they didn't. Right? They were throttling things like Netflix, and the whole net neutrality dispute was a huge drama. And finally, the government got involved, and they're regulating it. So it's kind of sad that the internet is now regulated in the actual country it was invented in. It was meant to be free. But obviously, if you run your own ISP, you would not have to worry about net neutrality, since you can control everything yourself. It's only when you have so many people trusting these huge corporations like Comcast or AT&T, and they just want to exploit their users to make better profits on their bottom line. It's really unfortunate the way that whole thing goes. I mean, it's kind of like a form of extortion, right? They basically go to Netflix and say, "Oh, we see you're sending a whole bunch of traffic to our customers. Well, it would be a shame if that traffic got throttled down to nothing, so they couldn't watch Game of Thrones anymore, right? How about you send us some protection money, and so we will protect your internet traffic so it doesn't get throttled down to nothing." And that's literally what they were doing to these other companies. And so if Netflix has no choice but to pay the protection money and increase the subscription fees to their customers, now Game of Thrones or whatever you watch is twice as expensive, simply because Comcast abused their monopoly power on being the ISP for so many people, right? So this is one of the reasons why it's very important to be self-sovereign. It's just kind of a general example, but I think you'll see this same line of thinking when it comes to Bitcoin more and more. It comes down to the three basic principles of security, privacy, and freedom, and those are all very complex, concepts of their own. You could talk about just security or just privacy or just freedom, but in this particular sense with net neutrality, it goes along with freedom and specifically anti-censorship, because throttling traffic is a form of censorship. You're just highly restricting it, and the Chinese firewall, the Great Firewall in China, does something very similar. If you VPN out of China, it'll work for a little while. And then a few hours later, you start to get packet loss, and then more packet loss. And then soon the VPN is so unusable that you think something's wrong with your router, or you think something's wrong with your Wi-Fi, and you're trying to troubleshoot, because it was working fine a few hours ago. What's the problem? But, they're just kind of, they're doing it in a more sneaky way, right?
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And so the cool thing with that thread is like it was almost like you sort of had the whole stack through, right? It was like it was your own land, your own mining facility, your own network, your own full node, and your own ISP. So, I mean, I think the ISP part is interesting. So, maybe can you just tell the listeners what does it take to make that work?
Sure. So I originally started my ISP and my kind of like my friend and family's business in Honolulu, which is the core data center of Hawaii. So I got the friends and family discount on my rack space, power, cooling, connectivity, all that stuff. And I had also co-founded a bunch of telecom-like companies when I was a teenager that are now huge companies in Hawaii. So they're very happy to give me the friends and family rate as well. So that was great for getting the ISP started. But all you really need, Blue Mat is a very good example. He's doing it on a shoestring budget as well. He purchased an IP block for probably I think $15 an IP address, or maybe $20 an IP address. And the smallest block you can get is about 256 IP addresses. So yeah, you probably spend about $5,000 on his IP block. Next thing you got to do is have a router that's physically connected to at least two different networks, and that'll qualify you as being multi-homed. And you can actually get your own what's called autonomous system number registered with your local, internet registry. So in North America, it's Aaron. In Asia Pacific, it's APNIC. In Europe, it's Ripe. Africa has their own. So everyone kind of has their own regional internet registry where you can join. It's a private nonprofit organization. They're not run by the government or anything. They're just this, it's internet governance, and it's usually totally deregulated. Of course, some countries do regulate the internet, right? So, for example, Japan and USA have freedom in their internet, but like Korea and China do not, right? So, if you want to watch porn in Korea, you need some kind of VPN to circumvent that censorship. Obviously, in China, you can't use Google, Facebook, Twitter, anything, and you need a VPN to pretty much use the internet. I think it's actually more accurate to say China doesn't really isn't really part of the global internet. They have like their own intranet, within China, that with very limited connections to the global internet. It's actually kind of really interesting to study. But yeah, going back to your original question, if somebody wants to start your own ISP, all you really need is a router in a data center, which is, you can lease this for quite cheap, or you can do it in your apartment like BlueMat is doing, and you can connect to at least two other internet connections. That's all you really need, and an IP address block maybe, or you can rent one of those too. I have a good thread on it on Twitter. I wrote about it, but that's it's a long topic to kind of get into the details of what you would need.
Yeah, sure.
I think to answer your question though about the full self sovereignty model is that this is a project I've been working on a long time. So I actually purchased some land out in the countryside of Japan where I built a Bitcoin mining facility, and my goal was to do everything 100% self sovereign. So actually, right now I'm installing these huge solar panels on the empty land I have. That'll actually allow me to generate my own electricity to run some miners. And this is part of a much larger vision to mine my own Bitcoin in my own mining facility using my own electricity that I generated, connected to my own ISP, that's running my own Bitcoin full node that's connected to the peer-to-peer network, and basically just not rely on anyone else as much as possible. So that's the long-term project, is to just be fully self-sovereign.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and I think when we were chatting in Tokyo as well, it was interesting. We were sort of talking about sort of like parallels between the internet routing and Bitcoin's Lightning Network, and I know you're playing around with Bitcoin and Lightning as well. So, can you offer some insight for us there?
Sure, I think actually Lightning is a very good way for people to understand how the internet works, because obviously Lightning is a peer-to-peer network just like the internet itself is, except that all you really need to run a node is install a piece of software. Where if you're going to run your own quote unquote full node on the internet, you actually need, a physical router that's physically connected to other routers. And so, as you know, to run a Lightning node, if you just set up the software by itself, you can't do anything. You need to connect to other nodes. So, okay, great. I connect out to a few other nodes, and as you know, some nodes are very well connected. Like even you could call them hubs, routing hubs, for example, like Bit Refill.
Hubs. Go on.
It's true though. Just like the internet, there are tier one providers like Sprint or NTT or CenturyLink, Level 3, all these, even Comcast. Basically, if you have a global network, people will pay a whole bunch of money to connect to you. And those are what people commonly understand as ISPs. And those are the quote unquote hubs of the internet, right? And then you have guys like me who are not hubs, we're the leafs, or we're not nearly as well connected. I mean, my network is actually connected to about 20 other networks in the world, and they're mostly between Tokyo and Honolulu, just friends that I've made along the way who are very happy to peer for free, or some other actually large ISPs that just happen to have an open peering policy. Like, for example, Hurricane Electric is a tier one provider, and they actually have an open peering policy, and they'll peer with anyone for free. So they're really cool. But other providers charge a boatload of money to connect to them, and that's how they make their money, right? So if you think of a Lightning node, like Bit Refill, people actually pay bit refill to open channels to them. And it's a very similar concept. You pay your internet provider at home to essentially open a channel to you so that you can have a well-connected internet connectivity. Whereas if you just run your own Lightning node and you connect to a few other people that aren't well connected, then obviously you're going to have routing issues, right? And this is why everyone in their homes just pays some company $50 a month for internet, because they don't want to have to worry about routing or anything. It's doesn't make sense to run your own ISP unless you really want the self-sovereignty, or you really can't trust your ISP, or there is no local ISP. In a city, it's pretty easy to get really nice internet connectivity. But if you're in the middle of nowhere, like my mining facility, then yeah, it's not so simple, right?
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings that analogy of how people talk about ISPs. Well, will we have something like an LSP, like a lightning, liquidity provider and that kind of thing? Maybe that's a model that we'll see come up.
Yeah, that sounds a very interesting discussion to kind of predict how the Lightning Network will develop itself over time. If you can imagine using Bitcoin over a payment network like Visa, MasterCard, or American Express, that would actually work totally fine, right? Because if you think about it, one of the most important things about Bitcoin is not really the payment network, so to speak. It's more of the fact that you have security, privacy, and freedom in your money, right? So sure, there's only a very limited amount of space in the blockchain, which is why we need these layer two scaling solutions. But to be honest, if American Express opened up a credit card tomorrow that said, "Oh yeah, it's denominated in Bitcoin, and we just send you a bill every month and for Bitcoin," it wouldn't be like that bad of an idea. Obviously, you wouldn't have security and privacy with your transactions on the American Express network or something like that, but and obviously Lightning is a far superior solution, but it really goes to show you how the goal of Lightning is to essentially issue some kind of gold certificate like instrument where you can just if your channel counterparty just disappears one day or tries to screw you over, you can just take that pre-signed transaction, go directly to the Bitcoin network and the Bitcoin blockchain, and get redeemed. And I think that's the real beauty of the Lightning Network. I don't know if I articulated that.
No, I think that's a good explanation, and I think it might be also interesting. I think Wiz, you've probably got some good advice or habits that you can share with more newer Bitcoiners about things like why they should protect their own security and their own privacy. Have you got any tips for them?
Sure. And we recently did a meetup event a few days ago in Tokyo where we had a panel discussion about why you should or why you should not run your own Bitcoin full node to verify your own transactions. And on the panel was Nicholas Dorier, Christian Moss, and the core developer Callier. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but
Yep.
they're all really, really bright guys, and it was a great panel discussion. But the biggest point that I wanted to make there is it always goes back to the three critical principles: security, privacy, and freedom. And I can give you some very quick examples why you would certainly want to run your own node instead of just using the American Express network or bank account or something like that. Obviously, number one, security in Bitcoin itself, as Bitcoin the token, right? Because there's Bitcoin the payment network, Bitcoin the blockchain, Bitcoin the software, and Bitcoin the token. The most important thing about Bitcoin, probably more than anything, is that you have security that the supply will always be fixed at a maximum of 21 million Bitcoins, and that somebody cannot arbitrarily print more money or issue more tokens. This is actually the definition of a shitcoin, right? No matter, no, really, like USD, JPY, there's something like, I think, 18 billion US dollars printed every day. It's insane how much money that the government and the bank robs from you just through inflation, without you even realizing it. I mean, in some countries, it is so bad that it is actually visible. Where they'll, in the supermarket, they'll reprice the produce like several times a day because the inflation's that bad. But obviously, that's the number one benefit of Bitcoin in general, is that you have security that your money will not be devalued. No one can steal your purchasing power through inflation. But number two security reason why you would want to run your full node is for verification. This is what we always say in Bitcoin, right? Don't trust, verify. And this simply means if I send you some Bitcoin, how do you really know if you receive that Bitcoin or not? Well, you pretty much have two ways to do that. You could use somebody else's node, or you could use your own node. And when you use somebody else's node, these are typically called block explorers. And it's who do you want to trust? Maybe some people in the past trusted sites like blockchain.info, but they would often not properly verify transactions. I remember one time the blockchain.info even showed that Satoshi's coins had moved, which was obviously totally false. And no other block explorer showed that at the time. But it just goes to show you they weren't verifying, right? They were just kind of trusting. Who knows what kind of implementation they had, but that's a very good example of why you should run your own full node and not trust somebody else's full node, is just simply to know if you really receive the funds or not. If I say, all right, I'm going to send you $1 million for some gold or some other products you're going to release, you probably want to wait for 10 confirmations, right, before you send those goods out, just to be triple sure that you're not going to get screwed over. And that's really what it comes down to. Of course, there's always some security trade-offs. Maybe you want to release, if it's a $5 coffee at the cafe, probably not, so much of a risk of getting a double spend attack on a $5 transaction. But there's different security trade-offs for different amounts. And then, of course,
Fantastic.
running your own Bitcoin full node, you also have privacy, right? If you're asking blockchain.info, did I receive this $1 million to my address? Well, now, of course, blockchain.info knows that you have $1 million, or that you're expecting it at least. Whereas if you run your own Bitcoin node, you can just ask your own node privately and monitor the addresses you're interested in or the transactions you're interested in, and nobody would know that you're watching those except for you. And number three reason, or I guess the big reason to do it, is for freedom. And it comes down to anti-censorship, right? If you're using somebody else's node, they could potentially censor your transactions or your activity. And this has happened a bit in the past. But I mean, just very simply, you have self-sovereignty, you have security, privacy, and freedom if you run your own Bitcoin full nodes. Of course you want to do this, right? It's how Bitcoin was meant to be used.
Yeah, great articulation there. I think a lot of the newer listeners to the podcast will really appreciate your explanations there. I think one more thing I was keen to touch on is just obviously, as you're an expert around networking and the internet, how important is it to use, and do you have any tips around VPN and Tor usage for the listeners?
Sure. So I actually I was an executive at a VPN company called Private Internet Access for a short while, and actually left that company with the CEO to start our own VPN company, which was later acquired by Private Internet Access. But long story short, yeah, I have a lot of experience working with VPNs, and they're really great because you don't have to, no matter where you are in the world, you don't have to be at the mercy of that internet connectivity wherever you might be. You could be in the middle of China, and you can just VPN back to your home ISP in Tokyo or Hawaii, where you have your own freedom, and no one will be able to see what sites you're visiting. No one will be able to manipulate the traffic that you're being sent. No one will be able to censor what sites you're trying to view, because that whole VPN use case is totally different depending on where you are in the world, right? If you're in USA, you might just want to download some torrents, and you might not want your ISP knowing about it, or you might not want the Hollywood knowing about it, just for pure privacy. And in that case, content is really king for the developed countries like USA. You're not worried so much about getting arrested for posting something that's negative about the government. But if you're in China or some other country, you'd absolutely be worried about your personal safety if you're writing negative things about the government. And so the privacy you gain from using a VPN from China is for a very different purpose, right? For freedom, or for privacy, or even your personal security. So, or if you just go to the Starbucks and you're using the public Wi-Fi there, obviously everyone can see your traffic because everyone has the same password to the same Wi-Fi network. So that's the actual security use case for VPN, is just when you're on a public network, shared network. There's lots of reasons to use a VPN, but they're all really solid and they're all in line with the self-sovereignty provisions. Just obviously, you have to trust wherever you're VPNing to, right? You're essentially replacing the local ISP wherever you might be in the world with the ISP that you're VPNing to. So of course I run my own ISP, I VPN to my home network, so I trust myself. But if you don't run your own ISP, you can, pay $5 a month to some VPN provider and trust them instead. And this is something you should really do your own research about if you want to trust a VPN provider to not log your traffic or monitor you in some ways. And a lot of them accept Bitcoin or even other anonymous forms of payment. And there's hundreds of them on the internet. You can find one that meets your needs, right? You also mentioned Tor. Tor is really beautiful because it's this distributed peer-to-peer, essentially kind of like a VPN network, except there's no central point of failure. And of course, there's some downsides whenever you have a decentralized network, like with Bitcoin or Tor or anything, is that it's always going to be more efficient if it's centralized, right? So, but making it decentralized, sure, it's slower, it's less reliable, and there's even security flaws, right? Look at Silk Road. Poor Ross, Ross Ulbricht got busted because of some security flaws in Tor, where they were able to basically figure out where his server was, or whatever methods they used, and a number of other, even Silk Road 2 and a number of other Alpha Bay, all these sites. So it's probably better to, in my personal opinion, trust a VPN provider or run your own VPN server on some leased hosting provider if you can. I don't know. Tor is 100% legit, but there's so many VPN protocols, especially like OpenVPN, that are really rock solid. And yeah, I could talk about VPN for hours, man.
Yeah, great. I think there's one other point I was keen to touch on. I think it came up as well. There's like parallels with coin joins and stuff as well. So there's this concept of an anonymity set, right? So in Bitcoin, people talk about this idea of privacy loves company, and that if there's not enough other people coin joining, then you look dodgy. Well, in the same parallel sense with a VPN, it's sort of like this idea that you need enough other people also using that VPN to create an anonymity set. Can you comment a little on that?
Oh, absolutely. And the worst example is my own ISP. So my ISP is just called Wiz. So if I go to whatismyipaddress.com, it says Wiz on there. That's probably the worst possible thing for if I'm trying to be anonymous on the internet. I wouldn't do it for my own ISP because I'm literally the only person using this ISP. I mean, sure, there's a few friends using it, but it's pretty much me. And you're absolutely right. Say private internet access, for example, they actually mix everyone's internet traffic together, on that particular server. So say there's 100 connections at any given time to a single server. That means all of those 100 people's internet traffic, every site, every DNS lookup they're doing is all coming from the same source IP address. So you don't know which one of those 100 people is accessing a particular site. It all gets mixed together in a really beautiful way. So there's times when you want, like you said, a big anonymity set. There's times where maybe you just want to be all alone, right? It really depends on your threat model, who's looking over your shoulder, what country you're speaking negatively about. You got to think about all that stuff, right? And I think the most impressive thing is that nobody's really been able to figure out who Satoshi was, right? He had perfect OPSEC, which is kind of unheard of, right? Because you look at all these other guys and they all made mistakes. Even, like I said, Ross earlier, or pretty much everyone makes a mistake at some point. They slip up, the government finds them. But man, Satoshi, he's out there, man.
Next level. Who knows? Who knows if he's even alive, to be honest. But, you know.
But that pretty much sums it up, right? Like you literally don't even know if the guy is dead or alive. That's how perfect his anonymity set, like you said, was, right? He was wherever he was VPNing from, he was probably doing both, right? He was probably using some VPN to connect to Tor, to go through a proxy. He just had this perfect
setup. Yeah, wow. All right. Look, I'm also keen. So thanks for that, Wiz. I'm also really keen to discuss what you're doing with Hive.one. So, Wiz, I know you recently did this whole Bitcoiner or Shitcoiner extension. Maybe just tell us a little bit about what was the original extension. I think it was called Conflict of Interest, and then you made your own version. Tell us about that.
Right. So this was actually a joke I made for my friend Mr. Hodel on Twitter. I was at Starbucks drinking a coffee, and I saw this. So his name is Luke Childs on Twitter. Made this really cool extension that just takes the HiveOne data and basically added it to somebody's Twitter profile page. Or if you hovered your mouse cursor over their profile, you could see what percentage of their followers were from which cluster on HiveOne. And if you're not familiar,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, if you just explain what Hive1 is, yeah.
right. So if you're not familiar with HiveOne, they are basically a data scientist company. So they're not originally Bitcoiners, but they're rapidly becoming Bitcoiners as I'm kind of educating them here and there. What they do is they look at all the public data on Twitter and they analyze your followers. What they take is they take all your followers and I don't know if you're familiar with graph theory, but they basically do some clustering analysis. And they cluster all these people together. And this is a very low level human instinct, right? It's like tribalism or echo chamber, whatever you want to call it. But for whatever reason, Democrat, Republican, humans always kind of go into these clusters. And you can very easily identify this with graph theory. So Twitter followers is probably one of the best ways to do it. But I could analyze your followers and see that they're almost all in the same cluster, which you could identify as being the Bitcoin cluster. And if you take someone else's followers, for example, I don't want to name any shitcoiners, but I mean it's the same phenomenon, right? If you go to, for example, Vitalik, Twitter account, most of his followers are in the Ethereum cluster, right? And sure, there is a little bit of overlap between those two clusters, but for the most part, they're very easy to identify on a graph. And what this browser extension did was it would just have a few kind of percentage meters of what percentage of your followers belong to each cluster. And so I think he had 4 clusters: Bitcoin, Bcash, Ripple, and Ethereum, or something like this. And so for most people in the Bitcoin cluster, it would say like, you're 99% Bitcoiner and maybe 1% something else. And so, to make my friend Mr. Hodel laugh, I just forked his extension and combined the other 3 clusters and summed them all together into one that said Shitcoin. And so
I love it.
I put it on the Chrome web store as Bitcoiner or Shitcoiner. And it made this very simple diagram of, are you a Bitcoiner or are you a shitcoiner? And for example, I think you and I are by far 100% Bitcoiners, but it was scarily accurate at no matter who you look at. Some other podcasters, I'm not going to name names, they would be kind of in the middle, maybe like 50% Bitcoiner, 50% shitcoiner. And it was always very, very accurate. And so while I just released this as a joke, I checked my Chrome Web Store stats a few hours later, and I had like hundreds of users had started using this extension. I was like, oh my God, this is actually like a huge thing. So I started talking to the HiveOne guys more and became really good friends with them and kind of, just doing my best to be a Bitcoin evangelist and teaching about the fundamental principles of Bitcoin. And they're actually super interested in Bitcoin. And so now that I've kind of joined them as a, contributor or, part of their organization in some way, the project that I'm actually starting 2 projects using their APIs, even though it's they're going to share quite a bit of code. The first site is an extension to or maybe the logical next step of the Bitcoiner or Shitcoiner browser extension. So it's going to be a website called bitcoinerorshitcoiner.com, where it will have essentially just a list of all the people on crypto Twitter, and it will very accurately label them as Bitcoiners or Shitcoiners. And yeah, you're going to be able to. Well, so that's the first step, right? Is just making the list. And then the second step is turning it into a much more useful tool where you can actually log in with Twitter to the website itself. It'll analyze the people you're following and say, okay, looks like you're a pretty hardcore Bitcoiner, but I see you're following these 10 shitcoiners. Would you like me to would you like me to just go ahead and unfollow them for you? And so if you're looking to improve your signal to noise ratio on Twitter, this is going to be a very useful tool. And I hope it can defend Bitcoin against some of the social attacks that it's seen recently. I mean, just to give you a really quick example, we had a Bitcoin meetup last week in Tokyo, and well, they say it was a coincidence, but the Bcash meetup changed its meetup to be at the same place at the same time as our meetup. And so, we're doing our presentations and our panel and stuff. And afterwards, they kind of come up and, they're like, oh, you're paying for your beer with fiat currency. Why don't you use Bitcoin? What's the fee, right? And, they're just so eager to, spout their narrative. And it's like, yeah, I want to argue with them and say like, yeah, it's called spend fiat, stack sats. Like, of course, I'm not going to spend Bitcoin on a beer and pizza when I know it's going to double the price probably in the next month or two. I'm going to spend my dirty fiat. Whereas they're very happy to, spend Bcash with its zero transaction fees. Here, I could argue with them, but what I really realized is that I don't even want to waste my time refuting that bullshit, right? I just want to improve my signal to noise ratio. I just want to focus on Bitcoin only. I want to unfollow the shitcoiners. I want to follow the really hardcore Bitcoin only people like yourself. And this tool, I feel, is gonna help Bitcoiners to do that, right? To improve their signal to noise ratio and defend against the social attacks. Another website which I've been contributing to recently is bitcoinonly.com. And this is a really cool source, again, for people who don't want to have any noise with their Bitcoin studies. So bitcoin-only.com is a really great resource to find, wallets or podcasts or meetups or anything related to Bitcoin that basically rejects shitcoin. So you won't find any shitcoin related, you know, noise in your resources if you check out this site. And the maintainer of the site is this guy named 6102, just a pseudonymous identity. And originally, we had created a section of the site for Bitcoin only people on Twitter. And within a few hours, people were arguing like crazy on Twitter. No, this guy's not a Bitcoiner. He's a shitcoiner. He was shilling this coin. And we decided really quick, like, all right, we're going to have to take this people section down from the Bitcoin only site because it's just too dramatic and too hard to maintain and too controversial. And so my solution for this is, again, going back to the HiveOne data, is to create a fully automated website where no humans have any ability to change anything, to curate a list of Bitcoin only people. And so this is the second website I'm announcing on your podcast. It's called bitcoinwizards.com. And it's going to automatically, it's going to combine the HiveOne Bitcoin cluster data. It's going to apply the Bitcoiner to shitcoiner ratio algorithms. And it's going to add some additional algorithms on top of that to spit out a list of Bitcoin wizards. And this is my solution to the Bitcoin only list of people drama, right? We're going to have a list of legitimate Bitcoiners on Twitter that's not generated by any human. It's just purely generated by algorithms. So there's going to be no opportunity for drama or controversy or for people to argue with each other. And it's actually really accurate. So I'm probably going to be releasing these sites very soon. But just to give you an example, all the high ranking people on the Bitcoin Wizard sites, which, by the way, it's separated by color. So there's black wizards, purple wizards, blue wizards, and red wizards, and they're kind of four different ranks of wizards, but depending on how much clout they have in the social network. but it's
Right. So like Adam Back is a black wizard kind of thing.
exactly, and Jameson Lopp and all the really top level guys. Unfortunately, I'm only a blue wizard right now. I'm pretty low on the totem pole, but maybe if I keep doing some good tweets and keep coming on your podcast, maybe I can level up to a purple wizard, right? So
Yeah, fantastic. I think it's a great idea. I think I think I see a bit of value for new people as well, right? Like if you're new to the space, like those of us who are kind of already deep into this, we know who's like a Bitcoiner, who's a shitcoiner. But if you're new to this whole world, it's kind of difficult. And I think maybe there's a little bit of value there as well. Because if you're new, you might come and see, oh look, Roger Ver has whatever 580,000 followers or whatever he's got, but you don't know the backstory of it.
exactly, and 100% of those 580,000 followers are all shitcoiners, right? So if if you understand clustering theory, it's kind of like Google's early implementation of PageRank. So now, of course, Google has very advanced artificial intelligence where you can sing a song into your computer and it'll tell you what song that was or something. The earlier version of that was PageRank, right? And you would have this very highly technical recursive algorithm that would assign a score to each website on the whole internet. And I think there was only a few websites that had the perfect score of 10. I remember one of them was Wikipedia. So if you had a link from, or like Creative Commons was I think PageRank 9. So if there was a link from Creative Commons to your website, that would give you a huge boost because they had such a high reputation and they were kind of voting for you in that way. And so the people rank algorithm of Hive.one, I mean that's not what they call it, but it's very simple to understand, is that, for example, if Adam Back is following you on Twitter, well, you just got a huge boost in your score because he's highly ranked. A lot of people follow him. And so it's this very recursive algorithm that, if a lot of high cloud people follow you, then your score will be high as well. And, or you could have a million low cloud followers and it all adds up, right? So there's many ways to get that overall high score. And that's how the Bitcoin Wizards site works, is that it takes those high ranking people, which, like you said, it could just generally be, like, for example, Fluffy Pony is a really awesome Monero developer, but he's not a Bitcoin maximalist guy, right? He's a Monero developer. So the point of the Bitcoin Wizards site is that it takes, even though he's high ranking on the Bitcoin cluster list, just because lots of Bitcoiners happen to follow him, it actually analyzes his followers and sees that a lot of them aren't in the Bitcoin cluster. So he actually has a lower Bitcoiner to shitcoiner ratio than, say, you or I would. And so the Bitcoin Wizard site would actually filter him out and disqualify him from being considered as a Bitcoin wizard on this site. And so that's what the different ranks of wizards are, right? It's a combination. You have to have both scores. You have to be highly ranked on the Bitcoin cluster from Hive.one, and you also have to have a very high ratio of Bitcoiner to shitcoiner followers.
Right. All right. And what about now? Okay, so a couple of the challenges that people might throw you. They might say, "Hey, Wiz, can't people game this algorithm?"
Yes, it is possible to game the algorithm in one particular way. And I think if you do this, it's totally fine. But obviously, the algorithm is analyzing your followers. And one hack you can do on Twitter is, if you just block someone and then immediately unblock them, that will cause them to not be following you anymore. So if you have a lot of shitcoin followers and you want to improve your Bitcoiner to shitcoiner score, yeah, you could just block all the shitcoiners, right? And I think we should actually embrace this feature because I would totally suggest people, yeah, you should increase your Bitcoiner to shitcoiner score. You should, because that's the biggest social attack on Bitcoin, right? Is just people saying these false narratives and basically wasting your time and trolling you into arguing with them about something stupid. And that's what Fox News does so well, right? Like, to give a real world example, is that they just kind of muddle the issue. And like you said, if you're a newcomer, oh, big blocks, small blocks, yeah, of course we should have big blocks, right? And if they don't understand technical nuances of computer science, you could be persuaded by a marketing team, right? And this is why Ripple is so successful. And so the purpose of these two sites I'm creating is, again, just to kind of filter out the noise, improve the signal to noise ratio, and defend against these social attacks.
Fantastic, yeah. And I think it just another common example, and historically there have been some people who, tried to identify as a Bitcoiner for the social cred, right? But then they would start scamming, right? So there have been a few individuals in kind of Bitcoin
Sure.
history who did that, and potentially this sort of algorithm, this sort of website might help at least some newbies sort of see. And it obviously depends how many newbies would go to HiveOne or go to, your websites, Bitcoiner or Shitcoiner, but there's potential there.
Yeah, so I'll give you a quick example of that. Remember when we were having lunch in Tokyo a few weeks back? We were kind of looking over at the HiveOne website really quick, and I actually confessed to you that I wasn't too familiar with a lot of the higher ranking people on there, but I wanted to, get to meet them, and I was very fortunate to meet you, and now we're friends. But there was one guy on Twitter I recently followed. His name is Pomp, or A Pompliano,
Yeah.
something like this.
Yeah.
And at the time, my Bitcoiner or Shitcoiner extension wasn't working because Twitter had just rolled out this new UI. So I was blind. I didn't have any hard data to go by. But I clicked on his profile. I had like 200,000 followers, and he had just gone on CNBC and he was talking all these great things about Bitcoin. He refused to talk about shitcoins on the show when one of the people asked him about it. So I thought, oh, this guy's probably cool. So I followed him. And I think like the next day or something, he tweeted something like Satoshi is legend with, fire around it. And I saw his tweet and I thought like, oh, did some news come out about Satoshi? Like what happened? And so I replied back to his tweet like, oh, what are you talking about? But then a bunch of people kind of told me like on the side, like, no, that's just what he does. Like that's his way of, growth hack, I think was the
Growth
word.
hacking.
Yeah. And I went over to the HiveOne site immediately, and I typed his name on the overall crypto cluster, where he was ranked very, very high. And then I clicked on the Bitcoin cluster, and I typed in his name, and he wasn't ranked at all. Which, if you do the math, that means he has 100% shitcoin score. That's what my algorithm would tell you, right? And I realized, like, oh my god, if my extension was working, I never would have followed Pomp. I mean, I'm sure he's a nice guy. It's just that I'm not interested in shitcoins, right? I'm only interested in Bitcoin. So I just wrote him a very polite message, like, sorry, dude, I'm actually not interested in what you're tweeting about. So I unfollowed him, and it's nothing personal, but if you're a Bitcoin maximalist person or you're just only interested in Bitcoin, this tool is actually really critical because even myself, I made the same mistake, and if I'm going to make this mistake, that means there's a million newcomers out there that are making the same mistakes, following the wrong people. Again, not going to name any names, but you can probably imagine this is why some coins are why some shit coins are valued so highly. When you look at them and you're like, this coin is totally worthless. Like, why does it have any value at all? All these people should be focusing their time on Bitcoin, and for whatever reasons, the marketing, used car salesman tactics that they use, it works, right? And so this is my hopeful solution to at least help defend against these social attacks.
Interesting, yeah. And I think it's also I'm thinking now also about the importance of reputation in this space generally, right? So we notice that some of the people who are high ranked are people who have been around for a long period of time, right? They didn't just kind of come out overnight and now they are well known in Bitcoin. They tend to have built up a reputation over time, and I think that's one of those things it's a little harder to fake.
Exactly. And so the really cool thing, bro, about this algorithm is that it's kind of like this holy grail of a distributed consensus model, right? So I think HiveOne is actually doing something that's a true 0 to 1 innovation, in the sense that on the internet right now, there's no really good like reputation score system. And I feel this could be the beginning of that. So for example, there are some Bitcoiners, or maybe former Bitcoiners, I should call them now, that, did something that the Bitcoiner community did not agree with. And as soon as they did that, everyone immediately unfollowed them. And of course, their HiveOne score tanked. And this is really beautiful for a distributed consensus mechanism, right? And the best part is that you don't have to trust HiveOne. You don't have to trust my website either, right? Everything's going to be open source, and you can run the algorithms yourself, and you'll get the same numbers. It's a really beautiful system that goes along perfectly with the underlying Bitcoin philosophical principles of don't trust, verify.
Right. And I think maybe just another challenge people might be thinking of is what about some, in fairness, very high reputation people in Bitcoin who simply do not use Twitter. So quick examples would be someone like Greg Maxwell or Andrew Polstra from Blockstream. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So what we're going to be adding is GitHub data onto the HiveOne backend. So it will be possible to, for HiveOne to kind of link a Twitter identity with a GitHub identity. And of course, it's totally opt-in. If you want to stay private, stay private. Don't link your data. But the opposite is that you're not going to have a higher reputation score, right? So if you want to be a highly ranked Bitcoin wizard, you're actually going to want to link all your publicly available data so that HiveOne can kind of rank it all together and see, oh yeah, whenever you push code to the Bitcoin core repository, it actually gets merged into their repo, and they can use that GitHub contributor data to see who's committing what and assign some clout score. So for the developer you mentioned, Greg Maxwell, he would actually get a pretty high clout score just from his GitHub commits alone, right? So coincidentally, like a lot of the highest ranking Bitcoin wizards are the core developers already, right? Just because most, like I said, the distributed consensus of Twitter is actually very accurate if you add it all together, which is what the algorithms are trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool as well that one thing is if you're a newbie coming into this space and you don't know who's legit or who's reputable, in some sense you're sort of putting a little bit of trust in the fact that all of the other highly reputable people follow this person, they retweet this person, they press like on their tweets, that kind of thing, or link to them. So I think that's an interesting idea as well, that as a newbie, you can take advantage of the expert knowledge.
Right. And that's the real beauty of a page rank or people rank type of algorithm, is that you, like you said, you can game the system of Twitter right now in the sense that you can go on Fiverr.com and buy 100,000 fake Twitter followers for $5. Or if you want your tweet to have 1 million likes, you can go on Fiverr.com, pay $5, and now all your tweets have 1 million likes on them, right? That's going to not affect your HiveOne score at all, right? Because HiveOne looks at the rank of the people who are who are following you. So if Adam Back is following you, you'll get a very high score. But if some botnet's following you, HiveOne doesn't care about those guys. They don't have any ranking on HiveOne. So this is a very good tool to kind of counteract that fake follower, problem. Like you said, if you're a newcomer and you look at someone's profile and they have 250,000 followers or even 1 million followers, you think, oh, this guy's really cool, but it's all bullshit, right? And that's what the tool aims to kind of reveal. It's just all about transparency. It's funny, like even the HiveOne guys, the reason they want to go Bitcoin only, it's kind of hilarious. All the other clusters are complaining to HiveOne because it's basically introducing transparency, right? But all the Bitcoiners, yeah, all the Bitcoiners are going to HiveOne and like, oh yeah, this is great. It's increasing transparency, right? So it's just a difference in, I guess, ethics or morals. But yeah, HiveOne is really awesome, and I'm trying to build on top of their data APIs with my own, algorithms and present it in a very user-friendly way. My sites are going to allow, like you said, people to just mass follow. So if you're a total newbie, you don't know who to follow, I'm just going to say, yeah, go to bitcoinwizards.com, log in with Twitter, and you can just say, okay, I want to follow the top 100 wizards on this website. And I can, guarantee you that it's going to be some of the best content on Twitter you can get. And this is not my personal opinion. This is what the just purely algorithms are telling you based on graph theory and clustering, right?
Fantastic, and this could be like you mentioned earlier the Bitcoin only website, which is fantastic. I every now and then I DM with 6102 Bitcoin only, great guy, and so he might even do something like set up a link where if you're a newbie, you can click this and it'll take you to that site and follow all the top 100 or 150 or whatever Bitcoiners on Twitter.
Exactly that. Yeah. So that's my real goal is in developing the Bitcoin Wizard site is to kind of partner with 6102 and his Bitcoin only site as the people portion of the site. So we're going to link the two sites together at some point. And the Bitcoiner or Shitcoiner website is mostly just to improve your signal to noise ratio, right? It's going to allow you to unfollow the Shitcoiners that you're not interested in and maybe follow some of the Bitcoiners that you didn't know about and that you are interested in. So the two websites will use the same API data backend and algorithms, but they're going to have very different front end UIs. And one of them, the Bitcoin Wizard site, will be connected to Bitcoin only, whereas the Bitcoiner Shitcoiner is more of a half serious, half fun site to kind of shame Shitcoiners.
Oh, I can imagine it now. Like all the shitcoiners will be like, "Oh my god, Wiz and Stephan, you toxic maximalists! Why aren't you more inclusive?"
Yeah, man, that's what we got to do, though, right? We got to defend Bitcoin against these social attacks, and just because I'm the organizer of the Tokyo Bitcoin, the only Tokyo Bitcoin meetup right now. That sounds ridiculous to say, and I'm actually starting another one out in Kanazawa, which is a few hours out of the city away from Tokyo, and there's a huge difference between the level of Tokyo people are it's a big city, everyone has Bitcoin, they're much more savvy. But if I go to the countryside, they're starting from zero, right? And I really have to teach them what is a full node, what is a wallet, what is a block explorer. And I can totally see why Japan has mostly been investing, if you can even call that, in Ripple and Bcash. It's simply because they didn't know any better. It's a very trusting society, very trusting culture. If somebody goes to them with a nice presentation and a nice speech about why Bcash is the real Bitcoin or why Ripple is better than Bitcoin because it's quote unquote regulated or whatever their narrative is, that's they buy it. And so many Japanese people like I've met, and they're like, oh no, I don't have Bitcoin, but I have Ripple. And it just kills me inside, right? And so I realized this is what I have to do. I have to build these websites, I have to organize these meetups, and I have to educate the masses to really defend against these shitcoin scams. This is like my calling in life, or this is how I got to give back to the community, right? I love Japan, and I really hate that it's just infested with all these shitcoin scams. It's the worst.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that a lot of my listeners will probably feel very similar about wherever they are. So, yeah, look. Anyway, look, I think that's pretty much it. But look, let us know if you've got anything else you wanted to add about Hive.one or about yourself. And obviously, before we let you go, let the listeners know where they can find you.
Sure. So I'm Wiz on Twitter, WIZ, and the two websites that I'm going to be launching shortly after this podcast is released are bitcoin-wizards.com and bitcoiner-or-shitcoiner.com. And yeah, hit me up if you want to talk about Bitcoin.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on, Wiz. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and I really appreciate that you're really strong about being a Bitcoiner. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm a hardcore Bitcoiner, man. Thanks a lot for having me on.
I hope you guys enjoyed that. I certainly found it very interesting around the graph theory and clustering. I think it's not a silver bullet, but it might help newbies find good people to follow on Twitter. So make sure you check that out. Links are in the show notes. This is episode 74. Just note the sites will not be available straight away. However, there are Twitter accounts available right now. Also, if you want to support me, guys, if you enjoyed this stuff, remember, rate, review, share it. And also, if you want to support me you can pay or make donations on my Tally coin, which is tallyco.in/Stephan Livera. And if you're interested in joining the private chat group for my supporters on Telegram, my Patreon supporters get access to that. So that's patreon.com/Stephan Livera. That's it from me. Thanks, guys. See you next time.